why this car was erased from the records. It existed, it competed, and then it vanished. No farewell, no explanation, just silence where history should have been. To understand why this car was erased, we need to go back to a moment when winning wasn't enough, when success threatened the rules themselves, and when recognition became dangerous. This car entered competition quietly. No massive hype, no radical styling. On paper, it followed the rules, every dimension checked, every regulation met. But something felt wrong almost immediately. Lap times dropped too quickly, not by tenths, by seconds. Rivals protested, officials rechecked measurements. Everything appeared legal, yet the advantage persisted. Engineers whispered about loopholes, not violations, interpretations. The car exploited gray areas perfectly. Airflow behaved differently than expected. Weight distribution created unnatural stability. Nothing broke, nothing bent, but performance soared. Drivers described it as effortless. Too effortless. Corners that demanded focus became routine. Errors disappeared. That ease raised alarms. Because racing depends on struggle, on limits being visible, on humans fighting machines. This car removed the fight. Officials grew uncomfortable. If this design spread, the sport would change overnight. Budgets would explode. Development arms races would begin. Smaller teams would vanish. The car hadn't cheated, but it had revealed a flaw in the rules, and flaws threatened systems. So discussions moved behind closed doors, not about penalties, about protection. Protection of the sport, of balance, of perception, because sometimes the most dangerous thing is proving the rules were never enough. And that realization put this car in danger. The danger was not legal, but institutional. There's a difference between a rule being broken and a rule being exposed as insufficient. The first is handled through established processes. The second requires a different kind of response, one that cannot be conducted in public without creating the very instability it is trying to prevent. Admitting that the rules had gaps large enough for an entire design philosophy to pass through undetected would have undermined confidence in the regulatory framework itself. And without confidence in regulation, the entire premise of fair competition becomes questionable. The car had not just won races. It had asked a question the sport was not prepared to answer openly. The response was subtle and deliberate. No immediate bans, no public accusations. Instead, clarifications appeared. Technical bulletins, revised interpretations. Suddenly, what had been legal was now unacceptable. The car failed scrutineering, not for what it was, but for what it revealed. Teams were instructed to modify designs, specific areas targeted, specific behaviors restricted. The erased car had become a template for what not to allow. Its results were reviewed quietly, records questioned, achievements reclassified. In official summaries, its name appeared less often, sometimes not at all. Commentators avoided mentioning it. Statistics skipped seasons entirely. Fans noticed gaps, wins without context, championships without explanation. The narrative was being rewritten. Inside the team, frustration boiled. They had followed every rule. They had outthought the system. But intelligence had become inconvenient. Legal challenges were discussed, then abandoned, because fighting meant exposure, and exposure risked harsher responses. So the team complied, redesigned, slowed. The car returned altered, tamed, ordinary, and with that, attention faded. The machine that had threatened the sport was neutralized without spectacle, not destroyed, but diluted. Yet the discomfort remained, because everyone involved understood the truth. The rules had failed first, not the car, and that truth refused to disappear. It waited quietly for the moment it would resurface. That truth lived in an uncomfortable place. The team knew it. The officials knew it. The rival engineers, who had studied the car's legal schematics with a mixture of admiration and relief, knew it too. What the car had done was not exploit a weakness in the rules through cunning misdirection. It had simply read the rules more carefully than the people who wrote them. That kind of intelligence is supposed to be celebrated in competitive engineering. The fact that it was instead suppressed told a story about the sport that the sport preferred not to tell about itself. Over time, the silence became heavier than the victory ever was. New champions were crowned. New cars filled the grids. But comparisons felt incomplete. Engineers across the sport remembered. They adjusted designs cautiously, avoided certain ideas deliberately, not because they didn't work, but because they worked too well. The erased car became a ghost reference, spoken about in corridors, never on broadcasts. Young engineers study regulations differently now, not to optimize performance, but to avoid embarrassment, because pushing too far no longer meant innovation, it meant erasure. The chilling effect was real and lasting. Entire categories of thinking became self-censored before they reached drawing boards. Engineers who might have pursued unconventional ideas instead ran informal compliance checks in their heads first, filtering out approaches that were technically legal but institutionally unacceptable. Innovation narrowed not because the rules demanded it, but because the memory of what had happened to this car was sufficient warning. The sport had successfully communicated its actual preferences without ever stating them explicitly, and its actual preference was clear: be better, but not too much better. The sport stabilized, costs leveled, competition tightened. On the surface, the solution worked, but something was lost. Racing became safer for institutions, but narrower for imagination. The erased car had proven that brilliance could still surprise the system, and the system responded by closing ranks. Fans sensed a change. Races felt closer, but flatter. Unpredictability was managed out, surprises engineered away, and the memory of that car became a quiet reference point, a reminder of what happens when performance exposes uncomfortable truths. The car didn't just challenge competitors, it challenged authority. And authority doesn't forget challenges, so the machine remained absent, not broken, not disqualified, simply removed from the story. Because sometimes history isn't written by winners, it's edited by rule makers, and that edit would echo longer than any lap time ever could. The car still exists in fragments. Photographs, data sheets, private memories. Those fragments carry a particular weight. Unlike the documented records of cars that competed openly and are remembered fully, these fragments exist in the gap between official history and lived experience. The people who worked on the car remember what it was. They remember the performance numbers that were recorded and then quietly reclassified. They remember the pride that preceded the silence. That knowledge lives in them without a sanctioned outlet. It cannot be published in official histories. It cannot be cited in broadcasts. It simply persists, past in quiet conversations between people who were there, becoming more fragile with each passing year as those people age and the first-hand witnesses thin. But officially, it barely happened. Its records sit in footnotes. Its victories blurred by revisions. Its impact reduced to silence. Yet its influence never truly left. Every regulation written afterward carries its shadow. Every restriction echoes its design. The erased car taught the sport a lesson it didn't want to learn. That rules are always temporary, and intelligence will always find gaps. Instead of celebrating that brilliance, the system chose containment, not because it was wrong, but because it was inconvenient. And that choice reshaped competition forever. The car wasn't erased because it failed. It was erased because it succeeded too clearly. Today, fans still debate what might have been, what records would stand, what innovations might have followed. There is a particular frustration in this kind of debate because it cannot be resolved. The counterfactual is real but unprovable. Had the car been allowed to continue, had its design philosophy been permitted to proliferate, the sport might have evolved in directions that are now permanently inaccessible. Rival teams would have responded. New designs would have emerged. The competitive ecosystem would have adapted, as it always does. What the erasure foreclosed was not just one team's success, but an entire evolutionary branch of the sport. That branch is gone, and its absence shapes the present in ways that are invisible precisely because they are absences, But history doesn't reward hypotheticals. It rewards control. And yet, somewhere between the regulations and the silence, the truth remains. That one car proved the limits were never real. They were just waiting to be tested. Subscribe to join the journey. Why